The fluorescent light above the kitchen sink flickered twice, then went dead. Maya Castillo stood there in the half-dark, her hands still buried in soapy water, and just breathed. She didn't curse. She didn't cry. She just stood perfectly still and counted backward from 10 the way her therapist had taught her, before she could no longer afford a therapist. 9, 8, 7. The water was going cold around her wrists. 6, 5. Her daughter Lily was asleep in the next room, Cinna curled up under a blanket that was too thin for February in Michigan. 4, 3. That was the third bulb this month, and she had exactly $11 left until Friday. She dried her hands on a dish towel that had seen better years, walked to the junk drawer, and found the last spare bulb rolling around between dead batteries and a screwdriver with a cracked handle. She unscrewed the old one, twisted in the new one, and the kitchen came back to life in pale, humming light. Maya looked around. The linoleum was peeling near the stove. The faucet had a slow drip that she had been meaning to fix for 7 months. The refrigerator made a sound like it was clearing its throat every 45 seconds. This apartment was falling apart. But it was hers. Well, it was hers for another 3 weeks, assuming she could scrape together rent. She poured herself a glass of water, because there was nothing else to drink, and sat down at the kitchen table. And spread out in front of her were the papers. She called them that because calling them bills made her chest tighten. Papers sounded temporary. Papers could be shuffled, stacked, pushed aside. Bills had weight. Bills had deadlines in red ink. Papers were just things on a table. The biggest one was from Lily's school. Not tuition. It was a public school, thank God. But the fees for the after-school program that kept Lily safe and supervised while Maya worked the evening shift at the warehouse. $240, due in 10 days. Below that, the electric bill. Below that, a notice from her landlord, politely worded but unmistakable. He was raising the rent by $150 starting next month. Below that, a letter from her mother that she hadn't opened yet, because letters from her mother always contained either guilt or advice, and Maya didn't have the bandwidth for either. She was 31 years old. She had a 5-year-old daughter who thought she was a superhero. She had a job that paid $12 an hour and left bruises on her shoulders from loading pallets. She had an ex-husband named Derek who had vanished 18 months ago and sent exactly 1 child support payment before disappearing into whatever new life he had decided was more interesting than fatherhood. She had a car with 187,000 miles on it that she spoke to like a sick animal every morning, whispering, "Please start, please start, please start." And she had pride. Stubborn, inconvenient, irrational pride that kept her from calling her mother and saying the words that would fix everything. "I need help. I can't do this alone. You were right." Maya finished her water, stacked the papers into a neat pile, and turned off the kitchen light to save electricity. She checked on Lily, who was sleeping with her mouth slightly open and one arm thrown over a stuffed elephant named Professor. Maya stood in the doorway for a long time. The hallway smelled like the neighbor's cooking, something warm and spiced, and for just a moment, just a breath, everything was almost okay. The next morning, Maya dropped Lily at school and drove to the warehouse. She clocked in 7 minutes early because she always clocked in 7 minutes early. Her supervisor, a man named Dale, who had the emotional range of a filing cabinet, nodded at her without looking up from his clipboard. She pulled on her gloves and started working. For 4 hours, she moved boxes. For 4 hours, she didn't think about the papers on her kitchen table. For 4 hours, she was just a body doing a job, and there was a certain peace in that. During her lunch break, she sat in her car and ate a peanut butter sandwich and scrolled through her phone. That was when she saw it. She was on one of those community boards, the kind where people sell old furniture and complain about potholes. And someone had posted a listing that stopped her thumb mid-scroll. County surplus auction. The post was from the Washtenaw County government page. They were auctioning off tax-delinquent properties, the kind that nobody wanted, buildings that had been abandoned so long that the county just needed them off the books. Most of them were empty lots or crumbling garages. But there, near the bottom of the list, was a line that caught her eye. Lot 47. Former Lincoln Consolidated School. It's a 2-story brick structure, circa 1928, approximately 18,000 square feet on 2.3 acres. Minimum bid $600. $600. Maya read it 3 times. An entire school building for $600. She almost laughed. It had to be a disaster. It probably had no roof. It was probably full of asbestos and raccoons and regret. Nobody sells a building for $600 unless the building is essentially a liability with walls. But something about it, maybe the date, 1928, which meant it had survived nearly 100 years, made her click through to the photos. There were only 4, all taken from a distance, all slightly out of focus in that way that government photos always are. A wide brick building with arched windows, most of them boarded. A set of double doors, the kind with the push bars, paint peeling but still standing. An overgrown field that might once have been a playground. And one interior shot, dim and grainy, showing a long hallway with a tile floor and lockers lining both sides. It looked like the building had been frozen in time. Abandoned, yes. Forgotten, certainly. But not destroyed. Maya saved the listing and put her phone away. She went back to work and didn't think about it. That's what she told herself. She didn't think about it while she stacked pallets. She didn't think about it while she drove to pick up Lily. She didn't think about it while she made dinner, which was pasta with butter, because that's what they had. She absolutely did not think about it while she lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling. $600 for a building. She didn't have $600, but she had a tax refund coming. A small one, maybe $800, which she had already mentally allocated to the electric bill and Lily's after-school fees. Taking $600 of that and spending it on an abandoned school building was objectively one of the worst financial decisions a person in her position could make. It was irresponsible. It was reckless. It was the kind of thing Derek would have done, and look where Derek was now. But Maya had spent 3 years making responsible decisions. 3 years of working overtime and clipping coupons and saying no to everything. 3 years of watching every penny and still somehow ending up here, in an apartment with peeling linoleum, counting light bulbs. Auction was Saturday. On Thursday, Maya auction was Saturday. On Thursday, Maya told her co-worker Janelle about it during their break. Janelle was 10 years older than Maya, had raised 4 kids on her own, and had opinions about everything, which she delivered with the certainty of a judge handing down a sentence. "Girl, no," Janelle said. "You cannot buy a school." "What are you going to do with a school?" "I don't know yet." "Exactly. You don't know, because there's nothing to do with it. It's going to cost you $600 to buy it and $60,000 to fix it, and then you'll have a fixed-up building in the middle of nowhere that nobody wants." "It's not in the middle of nowhere. It's in Dexter." "Dexter, where the nearest excitement is a gas station and a farm stand. The area's growing. They're building houses out that way." Janelle gave her the look that said, "I love you, but you are about to do something foolish, and I want it on record that I tried to stop you." "Maya, honey, you have $11 in your checking account. I have a tax refund coming, which you need for bills, real bills, not an imaginary school. It's a real school. I saw photos from the county that's trying to get rid of it. That should tell you everything." Maya didn't argue further because Janelle was making sense, and Maya didn't want to hear sense right now. She wanted to hear possibility. She wanted someone to say, "You know what? Maybe. Maybe there's something there. Maybe this is the thing." But nobody was going to say that, because nobody in her life dealt in maybes. Everyone she knew dealt in facts, and the facts were clear. She was broke, she was tired, and she had no business buying anything, let alone a 98-year-old school building with boarded-up windows. On Friday, her tax refund hit her account, $823. On Saturday morning, she left Lily with Janelle, drove to the county courthouse, and registered for the auction. The room was mostly empty, a handful of people in work boots and flannel, the kind who buy cheap properties to strip for copper and scrap. A couple in matching fleece vests who looked like they flipped houses for a living, or a man in a suit who was bidding on behalf of someone who didn't want to be seen bidding. And Maya, in her cleanest jeans and a sweater she had washed by hand because the laundromat cost $4 a load. The first 30 lots went quickly. Empty lots, condemned garages, a mobile home with no wheels. The prices were low, the bidding was fast, and the auctioneer moved through them like he was reading a grocery list. Then they got to lot 47. Former Lincoln Consolidated School, Dexter Township. It's a 2-story brick, circa 1928. 18,000 square feet, 2.3 acres. Condition as is, no warranties, no guarantees. Minimum bid $600. Do I have $600? Maya raised her hand. Her palm was sweating. $600 to the lady in the third row. Do I have $7? Silence. The room was quiet. Nobody else raised a hand. The couple in fleece vests didn't look up from their phones. The man in the suit was studying the next lot. $600 going once, $600 going twice. The auctioneer paused, looked around the room like he was waiting for the punchline to a joke that nobody was going to tell. Sold. $600 to bidder number 31. Maya walked out of that courthouse owning a building, an actual building. 18,000 square feet of brick and history, and probably several major structural problems. She sat in her car for 10 minutes before she could drive. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the wild and irrational, completely unjustifiable feeling that she had just done something that mattered. She couldn't explain it. She couldn't defend it. But somewhere under the panic and the math that didn't work, there was a hum, a low, steady vibration in her chest that said, "This means something. Pay attention." She drove to pick up Lily, and when she walked through Janelle's door, Janelle took one look at her face and shook her head. "Tim, you bought it. I bought it. Lord help us all. I got it for $600. Nobody else even bid. Because nobody else wanted it, Maya. That's what that means. Or it means nobody else saw what I saw. And what did you see? From 4 blurry photos on a government website?" Maya didn't have an answer for that, not one she could put into words. She had seen a building that had survived. She had seen something that refused to fall down. And maybe, in some small, illogical, and completely sentimental way, she had recognized herself. Word got around fast. Maya's mother called on Sunday. "Your sister told me you bought a school. Hello to you too, Mom. A condemned school. It's not condemned. It's tax delinquent. There's a difference. The difference being that one is officially dangerous, and the other is just unofficially dangerous. It's a solid brick building, Mom. It's been standing for almost 100 years. Standing and functional are not the same thing. Is there plumbing? Electricity? A roof? I haven't gone inside yet. A pause. The kind of pause her mother used the way other people use exclamation points. You bought a building you haven't been inside of. I saw the exterior photos, and the Maya Elizabeth Castillo. I have tried. I have tried to be supportive. I have tried to give you space and let you make your own decisions. But this This is the kind of thing your father would have done, and we both know how that turned out." That was the line her mother always used when she wanted to end a discussion. Your father. The ultimate cautionary tale. The man who had chased every dream and caught none of them, who had moved the family 5 times in 7 years, following schemes and plans that never materialized. Maya had spent her whole adult life trying to be the opposite of her father, and hearing her mother compare her to him felt like a slap. "It's $600. Mom, $600 you don't have." "I had it. I used my tax refund." Another pause, longer this time. "The tax refund that was supposed to go toward Lily's school fees. I'll figure out Lily's school fees." "How? By selling the school you just bought?" Maya ended the call before she said something she couldn't take back. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw spots. Everyone she loved was telling her the same thing. "You made a mistake. This was foolish. You can't afford dreams." And maybe they were right. Maybe on Monday she would call the county and ask if there was a way to undo the sale and get her $600 back and use it for something sensible and go back to counting light bulbs and stacking pallets and being responsible. Or maybe on Monday she would go see her school. She went on Monday. It was a 40-minute drive from her apartment, out past the edge of Ann Arbor, and into the stretch of farmland and woodland that felt like a different century. The GPS took her down a county road, lined with bare trees, their branches making patterns against the gray February sky, like cracks in old porcelain. Then she turned onto a gravel drive that hadn't been maintained in years, the stones scattered and sparse, more dirt than road, and there it was. The Lincoln Consolidated School sat at the end of the drive like something from a photograph you'd find in an antique store. 2 stories of dark red brick, the color deepened by decades of rain and sun. The arched windows were tall and symmetrical, most of them boarded with plywood that had warped and weathered to a silver gray. The main entrance was a pair of heavy wooden doors set under a stone lintel, and carved into the stone, still legible after 98 years, were the words, "Knowledge is light." Maya parked her car and got out. The wind was sharp, the kind of cold that finds the gaps in your coat, but she barely noticed. She was staring at the building. In the photos, it had looked sad, forgotten, a thing left behind. But standing here, in person, with the scale of it rising above her, she felt something different. It wasn't sad. It was waiting. The building had the patience of something that knows its own worth. It had outlasted everything around it. The farms that once fed the students, the roads that once carried them, the community that once needed it. Everything else had changed or vanished, and this building was still here, still standing, still carved with the belief that knowledge is light. She walked the perimeter first, the way you circle a sleeping animal before you decide whether to touch it. The brick was in remarkable condition. She didn't know much about masonry, but she could see that the walls were straight, and the mortar was intact in most places. There were cracks, certainly. It was slate. Heavy gray tiles that was slate. Heavy gray tiles that had survived nearly a century of Michigan winters. A few were missing, and she could see where water would get in, but the majority were still in place, overlapping in neat rows like the scales of something ancient. Around the back, at the bottom was metal, painted green. The bottom was metal, painted green a long time ago, now flaking to reveal older layers of paint beneath. White, then yellow, then the bare metal. She didn't try to open it. Not yet. She wanted to enter through the front. She didn't know why, but it felt important. She went back to the main entrance and pulled out the key the county had given her. It was a heavy brass key, the old-fashioned kind with a thick shaft and a complicated pattern of teeth. It looked like it belonged to a castle, not a school. She slid it into the lock, which resisted. then gave way with a sound like a sigh. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Old paper and dust and something mineral, like wet stone. It wasn't unpleasant. It was the smell of time, and of a place that had been sealed and still for years, breathing its own air. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust. She was in a front vestibule, a small entryway with a second set of doors, these ones with glass panels, clouded but unbroken. Beyond them, the main hallway stretched ahead of her, long and straight, with a tile floor in a checkerboard pattern of cream and dark green. The tiles were dirty and cracked in places, but most of them were intact. The walls were plaster, a painted institutional beige a long time ago, now faded and water-stained in places. Lockers lined both sides of the hallway, short ones at the beginning that must have been for younger children, growing taller as the hallway progressed. Some of the locker doors were open, some closed, some hanging at angles from broken hinges. Maya stepped inside. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hall, and the sound made the building feel enormous. She could hear water dripping somewhere, a slow, a rhythmic plinking that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Light came in through gaps in the boarded windows, thin blades of daylight that cut across the hallway at angles, catching dust motes that swirled and drifted like tiny galaxies. She opened the first door on her left, a classroom, smaller than she expected, with a row of windows along one wall, all boarded, and a blackboard on the opposite wall that still had writing on it. She moved closer, her breath catching. In faded white chalk, in the careful handwriting of a teacher who took pride in penmanship, were the words, Monday, June 12th. Spelling test. Study words on page 47. Below that, a list of words. Courage, discovery, treasure, adventure, journey. Maya stared at the list for a long time. She knew it was coincidence. She knew that a spelling list from decades ago had nothing to do with her standing here now. But the word treasure was right there on the board, and something in her chest tightened. She moved through the first floor methodically, opening every door, checking every room. There were 6 classrooms, each one frozen in various states of abandonment. Some still had desks, the old-fashioned kind with the chair attached, stacked in corners or scattered across the floor. One classroom had a mural on the wall, children's handprints in a rainbow of colors, with names written beneath them in the careful block letters of first graders. Emma, Tyler, Sophia, Marcus, Aiden. She wondered where those children were now, what they had become, whether any of them ever thought about this place. There was a main office near the front entrance, with a long counter and cubbyholes for mail behind it. The cubbyholes still had papers in them, memos, flyers, a PTA newsletter from the last year the school operated. She pulled one out carefully. It was a notice about a bake sale, the paper yellow and brittle, the ink faded, but readable, proceeds to benefit the school library fund. She put it back gently, like returning a letter to its envelope. Down the hall, she found the gymnasium. It was the largest room in the building, with a high ceiling supported by steel trusses and a hardwood floor that was buckled and warped from water damage. A basketball hoop still hung at one end, the net long gone, the rim slightly bent. The bleachers were wooden, pulled out on one side, collapsed on the other. The room smelled like damp wood and old rubber, and when she stepped onto the gym floor, it creaked under her weight in a way that made her step back quickly. Next to the gym was a stage, the kind used for school assemblies and holiday concerts. A heavy curtain, once red, now a dusty maroon, hung in tatters along a metal rod. Behind the curtain, the stage was bare except for a piano. An upright piano, pushed against the back wall, its wood surface dulled by dust. Maya walked over and lifted the fallboard. She pressed a key. The note that came out was out of tune and slightly muffled, but it was there. The piano still had a voice. She pressed another key, then another, and the notes rang out in the empty building like small declarations of survival. She found the library on the second floor. This was the room that made her stop breathing. It was larger than she expected, occupying what must have been 2 classrooms with the wall between them removed. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined every wall, and most of them still held books. Hundreds of books. Thousands, maybe. Their spines were faded and dusty, but they were there, arranged in the orderly rows of a library that had once been someone's pride. She pulled one from the shelf. A children's encyclopedia, copyright 1971. The pages were yellowed but intact. She pulled another. A biography of Abraham Lincoln, the binding cracked, but the text still readable. She pulled another and another, moving along the shelves, her fingers trailing across spines like she was reading Braille. History, science, literature, geography, math, an entire education left behind on these shelves, waiting for students who would never come back. In the center of the library, there was a reading area with low tables and small chairs, the kind sized for 8-year-olds. On one of the tables, someone had left a book open, face down, as if they had been called away and intended to come back. Maya picked it up carefully. The spine was cracked at the page where it had been left open. It was a chapter book, the kind a child would read for pleasure, not for school. She looked at the page that had been marked. It was the middle of a story, and the last line on the left page read, "She knew that the best things in life are always hidden in the places nobody thinks to look." Maya set the book down gently. Her hands were trembling, and she didn't know if it was from the cold or from something else. She stood in that library, surrounded by books that nobody had read in decades, in a building that nobody had wanted for $600, and she felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She spent 3 hours exploring the first and second floors. She found a teacher's lounge with a coffee maker still sitting on the counter, saw its cord coiled neatly beside it. She found a supply closet full of construction paper, faded from orange and blue to pale salmon and gray. She found a nurse's office with a cot and a cabinet still stocked with ancient Band-Aids and a bottle of calamine lotion that had separated into 2 distinct layers. She found a janitor's closet with mops and brooms and a shelf of cleaning supplies, their labels yellowed and curling. Everywhere she went, she found evidence of a life that had simply stopped, not destroyed, not packed up and moved, just stopped. As if one day everyone had walked out and the building had been holding its breath ever since, waiting for someone to come back and start it up again. It was late afternoon when she realized she hadn't checked the basement. She had seen the exterior stairs at the back of the building, but she had also noticed, on the first floor near the gym, a door marked "Basement, Authorized Personnel Only." It was a heavy fire door, and it painted the same beige as the walls, with a push bar and a small wire-reinforced window at eye level. She had walked past it twice without trying it, because the light was failing, and the first 2 floors had given her so much to take in that the basement felt like something to save for another visit. But now she was standing in front of it again, and curiosity was winning its argument with caution. She pushed the bar. The door didn't move. She pushed harder. It gave an inch, then stuck. She put her shoulder into it, the way she put her shoulder into things at the warehouse, and the door swung open with a groan of metal on metal that echoed down the stairwell beyond. The stairs were concrete, steep and narrow, descending into darkness. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut a white circle into the blackness below. She could see the stairs turning at a landing, then continuing down. The walls were painted cinder block, the paint chipped and peeling, or revealing layers of institutional green and gray beneath. The air coming up from below was colder, distinctly colder, and carried a smell she hadn't encountered on the upper floors. Damp earth and iron and something else. Something metallic and old. Maya took one step down, then another. The concrete was gritty under her shoes. Her phone light bounced off the walls, creating shadows that moved and stretched. At the landing, she turned and looked down the second flight. At the bottom, she could see a floor, concrete, and the edge of a wall. She descended the rest of the way and found herself in a corridor, much narrower than the hallways above, with a low ceiling that she could almost touch if she raised her hand. She moved forward, phone held out in front of her. The corridor ran straight for about 50 feet, with doors on either side. She tried the first one, a boiler room, dominated by an enormous cast-iron furnace, the kind that burned coal, so to reveal a darkness inside that seemed to reveal a darkness inside that seemed deeper than the room itself. The next room was storage. Metal shelves loaded with boxes, old textbooks, stacks of files tied with string. She pulled one file out, student records from 1962. Names, grades, attendance. Lives reduced to numbers and check marks. She put it back. The third room was locked. Not just closed, locked with a different kind of lock than anything else she had seen in the building. The doors upstairs had standard institutional hardware, the kind you see in every school. Simple locks that matched the master key the county had given her. But this door had a deadbolt, a heavy, serious deadbolt that looked newer than the door it was mounted on, which was itself different from the other basement doors. The other doors were hollow core, cheap. Eyes the kind that dent if you kick them. This one was solid. She knocked on it with her knuckles, and the sound was dense, flat, the sound of something substantial. She tried her key. It didn't fit. Maya stood in front of that door for a long time. The sensible thing to do was walk away. It was a locked door in a basement. It was probably a mechanical room, or an electrical closet, or something equally mundane that had been sealed for safety reasons. There was probably a boring explanation for everything about it. The heavy door, the deadbolt, the fact that her master key didn't work. There was probably nothing interesting behind it at all. But the door was different. Everything else in this building was consistent. The same hardware, the same paint, the same institutional sameness. This door broke the pattern. Someone had installed this lock deliberately, separately from the rest of the building's hardware, and someone had wanted this room to stay closed. She took a photo of the lock with her phone and made a note of the location. Third door on the right side of the basement corridor, approximately 30 feet from the stairwell. Then she turned around and went back upstairs. Outside, the sun was low, casting the building in amber light. Maya locked the front door and stood on the steps. Her building. She said it out loud, just to hear how it sounded. My building. It sounded ridiculous. It sounded wonderful. She drove home in the fading light, her mind full of tile floors and chalkboards, and a locked door in a basement that she couldn't stop thinking about. She picked up Lily from Janelle's, thanked Janelle, deflected Janelle's questions about how the visit went, and drove home. She made dinner. She gave Lily a bath. She read Lily a bedtime story about a bear who found honey in an unexpected place, which felt on the nose in a way that made her smile. She kissed Lily's forehead and turned off the light and went to the kitchen. She sat at the table with the papers still stacked where she had left them. The electric bill, the rent increase, Lily's school fees. She was $600 poorer than she had been on Friday, and she owned a building that needed more money than she would earn in a decade. Everyone was right. Her mother was right. Janelle was right. The couple in the fleece vests at the auction who hadn't even bothered to bid were right. She had bought a problem, not a solution. But that door, that locked door in the basement with the deadbolt that didn't match anything else, that door was a question, and Maya had always been the kind of person who needed to know the answer. She opened her laptop, which was 8 years old, and took 4 minutes to boot, and started searching. Lincoln Consolidated School, Dexter Township. She found very little. A mention in a local history blog about the school's opening in 1928, when it was built to serve the farming communities south of Dexter. A brief article from a local newspaper about its closing in 2003, when declining enrollment made it unsustainable. A notice about its tax delinquent status from 5 years ago. That was it. The school's entire digital footprint fit on a single page. But then she went deeper. She searched for the history of the area, the land the school sat on, the people who had built it. And she found something that made her sit up straight. The school had been built on land donated by a man named Franklin Whitmore. She found his name in the cornerstone records archived by the County Historical Society. Franklin J. Whitmore, 1871 to 1949. Industrialist, philanthropist. He had made his fortune in the early automotive industry, supplying parts to Ford and General Motors in the 1910s and 1920s, when he had owned thousands of acres in Washtenaw County and had donated the land and funded the construction of the school as a gift to the community. The Historical Society had a brief biography that mentioned his other philanthropic works: a church, a library in Ypsilanti, contributions to the University of Michigan. But the school was described as his pride, the project he cared about most, the one he oversaw personally. Franklin Whitmore had been rich, very rich, and he had built this school not just as a charity, but as a monument. She looked at the photos she had taken earlier that day, the stone lintel, the arched windows, the slate roof. This was not a building made on a budget. This was a building made by someone who wanted it to last forever. She searched for more about Whitmore. There wasn't much online. He was a second-tier industrialist, wealthy but not famous, the kind of man who shows up in footnotes rather than headlines. He had died in 1949, and his estate had been divided among various heirs and trusts. The land around the school had been sold off over the decades, parceled into farms, and eventually into the subdivisions that were now creeping out from Ann Arbor. But one detail caught her attention: a mention in a 1987 article about local history that Whitmore had been known as an eccentric collector. The article didn't specify what he collected, just that he was known to have acquired significant holdings of art, antiquities, and rare documents. The article said his collection had never been fully cataloged after his death, and that various items had surfaced at auctions and estate sales over the following decades. Maya closed her laptop. She was breathing faster than normal. She told herself to calm down. A rich eccentric built a school. The school has a locked room in the basement. This does not mean there is treasure in the locked room. This is not a movie. This is real life, and where locked doors lead to water heaters and electrical panels, and rich eccentrics just build things and die, and their stuff gets sold at estate sales. There is no treasure. But the door. That door was different from every other door in the building. She went to bed. She did not sleep well. Over the next 2 days, Maya's thoughts kept circling back to the school and that basement door. She worked her shifts at the warehouse, picked up Lily, and made dinners that stretched their groceries as far as they could go. And every quiet moment was filled with the image of that heavy door with its out-of-place deadbolt. She researched locksmiths. She researched building codes. She researched what a person does when they find a locked room in a building they just bought. The answer, it turned out, was simple. You open it. It's your building. You can open any door you want. On Wednesday, she drove to a hardware store and bought a basic lock-picking set for $22, watching a tutorial video on her phone in the parking lot 3 times before she felt confident enough to even try. She practiced on her own apartment door, which took her 45 minutes and left scratches on the doorknob that she covered with a piece of tape. On Thursday, she went back to the school. She arrived in the early afternoon when the light was strongest. She brought a proper flashlight this time, not just her phone, plus a bag with water, a sandwich, the lock-picking tools, and a hammer, just in case the tools didn't work and brute force became necessary. She also brought Lily's stuffed elephant, Professor, because Lily had insisted that Professor wanted to see Mama's school, and Maya didn't have the heart or the energy to argue. She went straight to the basement, down the concrete stairs, along the narrow corridor, past the boiler room and the storage room, to the third door on the right. The deadbolt gleamed dully in her flashlight beam. She set down her bag, pulled out the lock-picking tools, and went to work. It took her an hour and 20 minutes. Her fingers cramped. She broke 2 of the picks. She considered the hammer. She almost gave up twice. But then there was a click, a solid, satisfying click that she felt in her wrist, and the deadbolt turned. She pulled the door open. Her flashlight beam pushed into the room beyond, and Maya Castillo, single mother, warehouse worker, owner of a building nobody wanted, whispered the words that would change everything. "Is anyone else here?" Her voice echoed off surfaces she couldn't yet see. The room was larger than she expected, much larger, extending beyond the reach of her flashlight. She stepped inside, her beam sweeping left and right, and what she saw made her stop walking, stop breathing, unstop everything except standing perfectly still and trying to understand what she was looking at. This was not a mechanical room. This was not an electrical closet. This was not storage. The room had been finished, while the rest of the basement was raw cinder block and concrete. This room had plastered walls, a smooth concrete floor that had been painted, and a ceiling with actual light fixtures. Old ones, brass, the kind you see in buildings from the 20s, mounted in a row down the center. Someone had built a room within a room down here. A proper room, with care and intention and money. And the room wasn't empty. If you're enjoying this story and want to hear what Maya found in that hidden room below the school, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more incredible true stories like this one to life. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Along the far wall, there were cabinets. Large wooden cabinets, the kind you see in museums, with glass fronts and brass handles. Maya moved toward them, her flashlight beam shaking slightly because her hands were shaking. Inside the first cabinet, she could see shapes. Objects arranged on shelves, covered in dust, but clearly placed with care. She wiped the glass with her sleeve and pressed her face close. She was looking at a collection. Porcelain figurines, each one on its own small stand, arranged in rows. They were beautiful even through the dust. Delicate figures in fine detail, some of them painted in colors that still shone through the grime. She didn't know what they were or what they were worth, but she knew quality when she saw it. These were not trinkets from a gift shop. These were pieces that someone had collected deliberately, that someone had valued enough to build a room for, to lock away, to protect. She moved to the next cabinet. Coins, trays of coins, but each one nestled in its own velvet-lined compartment. Gold and silver, some of them larger than anything she had seen in a cash register, some of them so small she could barely make them out through the dusty glass. Next to the coins, a shelf of small boxes, the kind that jewelry comes in, their lids closed, their contents unknown. The third cabinet held documents, papers in protective sleeves, arranged upright like files. She could see handwriting through the sleeves, old handwriting, saw the kind done with a fountain pen on thick paper. Some of the documents had wax seals. Maya's legs felt weak. She sat down on the concrete floor and put her head between her knees. Her flashlight rolled slightly, its beam sweeping across the room and catching something on the opposite wall that she hadn't seen yet. She grabbed the flashlight and pointed it. A vault door. Set into the wall, almost flush with the plaster, was a vault door. Not a regular door, not a closet door, but a vault door. Round, with a handle and a combination dial, the kind of door you see in banks. Maya sat on the floor of a hidden room beneath an abandoned school she had bought for $600, looking at a bank vault door that had no business being there, and she started to laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. Because things like this do not happen to people like her. Because she had $11 in her checking account, and there was a vault in her basement. She didn't try to open the vault. Not today. She was shaking too hard, and something in her, some deep instinct, told her that whatever was behind that door required preparation. It required witnesses. It required someone who could tell her whether she was dreaming or whether the world had just cracked open and revealed something extraordinary underneath. She took photos, dozens of photos, the cabinets, the porcelain, the coins, the documents, the vault door. She photographed everything from multiple angles, making sure the images were clear, making sure that when she looked at them later, in the rational light of her apartment kitchen, she would know that this was real, that she hadn't imagined it. Then she closed the door to the hidden room, left the basement, locked the school, and drove home. She picked up Lily. She made dinner. She gave Lily a bath. She read Lily a story. She did all the things she always did, the routine that held her life together. But the whole time, her phone sat in her pocket like a grenade, loaded with images of something that was about to change everything. That night, after Lily was asleep, Maya sat at the kitchen table and looked at the photos. One by one, slowly, zooming in, studying every detail. The cabinets were real. The coins were real. The vault was real. In one photo, she could make out a name engraved on a small brass plate mounted on the wall near the vault door. When she zoomed in as far as her phone would allow, the letters were small, but clear. F.J. Whitmore, Private Collection, 1936. Franklin Whitmore hadn't just built the school. He had built a vault underneath it. He had stored his collection in a secret room in the basement of a school he had donated to the community, a room that apparently nobody had known about or accessed in decades. Maybe nobody had ever known about it except Whitmore himself. Maya set her phone down. Old collections and valuations, and what old collections and valuations, and what you do when you find a hidden vault in your basement. She needed a professional, but professionals cost money, and she had $11 and a $600 building and approximately 1 million questions. She picked up her phone again and started searching. Estate appraisers, antique specialists, historical preservation experts. She wrote down names and numbers and websites, making a list on the back of the electric bill because it was the only paper within reach. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would make calls. Tomorrow she would start figuring out what she had found. But tonight, she let herself sit with it. She let herself feel the weight of the moment. The sheer absurdity and wonder of a single mother with $11 finding a hidden vault beneath a school she bought on a hunch. She let herself imagine, just for a moment, that the spelling list on the chalkboard hadn't been a coincidence. Courage, discovery, treasure, adventure, journey. She was on a journey. She had no idea where it was going. But for the first time in 3 years, she wanted to find out. The next morning, Maya called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. Dale didn't ask questions. He just grunted and said, "See you tomorrow," and hung up. She dropped Lily at school, drove straight to the public library in Ann Arbor, and sat down at a computer. She had a list of names and numbers, But before she called anyone, she needed to understand what she was dealing with. She needed to know what Franklin Whitmore might have collected and what a hidden vault from 1936 might reasonably contain. She spent 3 hours reading. She learned that the 1920s and 1930s were a golden age for American collectors, that wealthy industrialists of that era routinely amassed enormous private collections of art, coins, documents, and antiquities. She learned that many of these collections had been lost, scattered, or forgotten after their owners died, particularly when the owners had been secretive about their holdings. And she learned that some of the most valuable discoveries in American history had been found in exactly this way. Hidden rooms, sealed vaults, forgotten safes in buildings that had changed hands multiple times over the decades. She also learned that she needed to be very careful about who she told. The internet was full of stories about people who had found valuable things and then lost them. Lost them to lawyers, to the government, to distant relatives who materialized out of nowhere with claims. Lost them to thieves who read about the discovery in the news. Lost them to their own ignorance, selling things for a fraction of their value because they didn't know what they had. Maya was not going to be one of those people. She was going to be smart about this. She was going to be methodical. She made 3 phone calls from the library parking lot. The first was to a real estate attorney named Patricia Okafor, whose name she had found on the State Bar website. Patricia listened to Maya's carefully vague description of the situation. I bought a property at auction and found some items inside, and I need to understand my legal rights, and agreed to a free 30-minute consultation the following week. Maya didn't mention the vault. She didn't mention Whitmore. She just said items and left it at that. The second call was to the University of Michigan's Department of History. She explained that she had purchased a property with historical significance and was looking for someone who could help her understand its provenance. The department secretary was polite, but unhelpful, directing her to an online form. Maya filled it out on her phone, sitting in her car, her fingers cold because she couldn't afford to run the heat while parked. The third call was the one that changed everything. She called the Washtenaw County Historical Society. A woman named Ruth Bergman answered. And when Maya mentioned the Lincoln Consolidated School and Franklin Whitmore, Ruth made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. "You bought the Whitmore School? The one that's been sitting empty?" "I did. Last Saturday." "And you're interested in Whitmore's history?" "I'm interested in everything about him, especially his collection." There was a pause. "His collection? You know about that?" "I know he was a collector. Art, antiquities, documents. I read that it was never fully cataloged after his death." That's the understatement of the century. Ruth's voice had shifted from polite to animated. Franklin Whitmore was one of the most prolific private collectors in the Midwest, and nobody knows what happened to most of it. His family sold some pieces through Christie's in the 1950s, and a few things turned up at regional auctions over the years, but the majority of his collection simply vanished. There have been theories for decades. Some people think it was distributed privately among family members. Some people think it was sold quietly to avoid taxes. And some people think... She stopped herself. "Think what?" "Some people think he hid it. Whitmore was famously paranoid about theft. He lived through the Depression, watched banks fail, watched fortunes disappear overnight. There were rumors even during his lifetime that he had built hidden storage spaces in his properties. Nobody ever found any, but Whitmore owned dozens of buildings across the county. Not all of them have been thoroughly examined. Maya's grip on her phone tightened. How much was his collection worth? In his lifetime? Difficult to say. He never insured the full collection, which was part of the mystery. But based on the pieces that were sold after his death, a few dozen paintings, some Roman coins, and a collection of Civil War letters, appraisers at the time estimated that what surfaced represented maybe 5 to 10% of what he was known to have acquired. 5 to 10%. The rest has never been accounted for. Maya closed her eyes. She was sitting in a library parking lot in a car with 187,000 miles on it, and she was being told that the man who built her school had a missing collection worth. She did the math quickly, and based on what she had read about similar collections from that era, adjusted for decades of appreciation, worth potentially tens of millions of dollars. Maybe more. Ruth, I need to tell you something, but I need you to keep it confidential. Of course. I found a room in the basement of the school, a hidden room behind a locked door. It has cabinets with what looks like a collection inside. Porcelain, coins, documents. And there's a vault door set into the wall. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Maya checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Ruth? I'm here. Maya, are you telling me you found Whitmore's vault? I'm telling you, I found a vault in a building Whitmore built. I don't know what's inside it. A vault? In the school? All this time? Ruth's voice had gone quiet, almost reverent. Researchers have been looking for this for 50 years. 50 years. And it was under a school. They talked for another 40 minutes. Ruth was a retired professor, 67 years old, who had spent the last decade volunteering with the Historical Society and had written 2 unpublished papers on Whitmore's life and legacy. She knew more about him than anyone else Maya was likely to find. She was also, critically, someone who understood the importance of discretion. Ruth agreed to come see the room, not as an appraiser, not as an official anything, and just as someone who could help Maya understand what she was looking at. They arranged to meet at the school on Saturday morning, when Maya could get Janelle to watch Lily. The days between that phone call and Saturday were the longest of Maya's life. She went to work. She picked up Lily. She made dinners and read bedtime stories and checked her bank account and paid the electric bill with money she didn't really have. She told no one about the vault. Not Janelle, not her mother, not anyone. The secret sat inside her like a second heartbeat, constant and heavy. On Saturday, she met Ruth at the school. Ruth was a small woman with silver hair and glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck, and she arrived in a Subaru that was almost as old as Maya's car, carrying a canvas bag full of reference books and a flashlight the size of her forearm. "Show me," she said, before she even said hello. Maya led her through the building, down the basement stairs, along the corridor, onto the door she had picked open 4 days earlier. She pushed it open and stepped aside. Ruth walked into the room slowly, her flashlight beam moving across the walls, the floor, the cabinets. She didn't speak for a full 2 minutes. She just looked. Then she walked to the first cabinet, wiped the glass with her sleeve the same way Maya had, and pressed her face close. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That's Meissen." "What?" "The porcelain. That's Meissen porcelain. 18th century. If I'm not mistaken. Those figurines, Maya, each one of those could be worth $5,000 to $10,000, maybe more." She moved to the next cabinet. "And the coins. I can't be certain without a closer look, but some of those look like they could be colonial-era gold. Pre-revolutionary." She stood in front of the vault door for a long time, reading the brass plate. F.J. Whitmore. Private collection. 1936. She reached out and touched the door gently, on her fingers tracing the edge of the combination dial. "This is it," she said. "This is the collection everyone's been looking for." She turned to Maya, and there were tears in her eyes. "Do you understand what this means?" "I'm starting to." "No, I don't think you are. Not yet. What's in these cabinets, the porcelain, the coins, the documents, this is significant. But this is what he left outside the vault. These are the things he didn't lock behind a combination. Whatever is behind this door, he considered it more valuable than everything out here. Maya stared at the vault door. A steel door, round, built into the wall of a school basement in 1936 by a man who was afraid of banks and trusted concrete more than people. Behind that door was something that Franklin Whitmore had valued above a collection of Meissen porcelain and colonial gold coins. Something he had hidden so well that 50 years of searching hadn't found it. "Can you open it?" Maya asked. "Me? No. This is a combination vault. Without the combination, you'd need a professional locksmith who specializes in antique safes. There are maybe a dozen people in the country who do that kind of work. How much would that cost? Several $1,000s at least." Maya felt her stomach drop. Several $1,000s. She had exactly $9 in her checking account, and a car that needed an oil change, and a daughter who needed new shoes. And several $1,000s might as well have been several million. Ruth must have seen it in her face. "Maya, whatever is behind that door is going to be worth considerably more than the cost of opening it. Consider it an investment." "I can't invest money I don't have." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Let me make some calls. I know people in the historical community who would consider this the find of a lifetime. Some of them might be willing to help, discreetly, in exchange for the opportunity to be part of the documentation process. I don't want anyone else knowing about this. I understand, but you can't do this alone. You need an appraiser, you need a locksmith, you need a lawyer, and eventually, you're going to need a conservator to properly handle whatever is in that vault. These are not things you can do with a $22 lock-pick set and a prayer." Maya almost smiled. The lock-pick set worked. On a deadbolt. So that, Ruth pointed at the vault, is a different conversation entirely. Over the next 2 weeks, Ruth made her calls. She was careful. She didn't tell anyone where the vault was or who owned the building. She simply said that a significant Whitmore discovery had been made, and that qualified professionals were needed. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ruth's phone didn't stop ringing. She assembled a small team, a locksmith named Gerald Pratt, who had spent 30 years opening antique safes for museums and estates across the country, an appraiser named Dr. Helen Chen from the University of Michigan, who specialized in American collections from the Gilded Age and Progressive era, and Patricia Okafor, the real estate attorney Maya had already contacted, who agreed to handle the legal aspects for a deferred fee, to be paid from whatever the collection was worth. So Patricia had reviewed the auction paperwork and the county records and confirmed what Maya desperately needed to hear. The building and everything inside it, including anything found in the basement, belonged to Maya. The county had sold it as is, all contents included. There were no liens, no claims, no outstanding disputes. It was hers. Gerald Pratt arrived on a Tuesday. He was a large, quiet man in his 60s, with hands that moved with the delicacy of a surgeon. He brought 2 cases of tools and a stethoscope, which he explained was not for hearts, but for tumblers. He looked at the vault door for approximately 10 seconds and said, "Mosler, 1930s. Good vault. I can open it." "How long will it take?" Maya asked. "Depends on how many numbers are in the combination. 3-number combo, maybe 2 hours. 4 numbers, maybe 4. If the mechanism is seized or damaged, could be longer." He set down his cases and opened them. And you should probably sit down somewhere. This takes patience." Maya didn't sit down. She stood against the far wall and watched Gerald work. Ruth stood next to her, clutching her canvas bag. Dr. Chen, who had arrived that morning from Ann Arbor, sat on an overturned crate and took notes in a leather journal. Patricia Okafor was upstairs, making phone calls about the property's insurance status, which was currently non-existent. Gerald worked in silence. He pressed the stethoscope to the vault door, turned the dial with agonizing slowness, his eyes closed, his head tilted to one side. Every few minutes, he would write a number on a small pad, then reset the dial and start again. The room was completely quiet, except for the faint clicking of the tumblers and the sound of 5 people breathing. 1 hour passed, then 2. Gerald showed no frustration, no impatience. He simply kept turning the dial, listening, writing numbers, resetting. Maya's legs ached from standing. Ruth had sat down on the floor. Dr. Chen had filled 4 pages of her journal with notes about the cabinets and their visible contents. At the 2-hour and 37-minute mark, Gerald stood up from his stool, stretched his back, and rolled his neck in a slow circle. Then he looked at Maya, and for the first time, he smiled. Got it. He reached for the dial, turned it to a final position with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, ungripped the vault handle with both hands, and pulled. The handle resisted for a moment, locked in decades of stillness, and then turned with a deep, metallic sound that seemed to come from inside the wall itself, from the bones of the building, from the earth beneath it. The door swung open. It was heavy. Maya could see the muscles in Gerald's forearms tensing, and it moved slowly, with the reluctance of something that had been closed for 88 years and had grown accustomed to solitude. Cold air came out, not the cold of a basement, which was the cold of earth and stone, but a different cold. Dry. Sealed. The cold of a space that had been airtight for almost a century. It smelled like nothing Maya had encountered before, old metal and dry paper, and something faintly chemical that doctor, Chen later explained, was the residue of preservation materials that Whitmore had used to protect the contents. Maya pushed off the wall and walked forward. Her steps echoed differently now, the sound bouncing off the open vault in a way that made the room feel suddenly larger. Ruth was already on her feet, her hand pressed against her chest. Dr. Chen had dropped her journal and was standing with her mouth slightly open, the scientific composure she had maintained all morning dissolving in an instant. The vault was not a room. It was a chamber, perhaps 12 feet deep and 10 feet wide, with metal shelving along both walls and a large table in the center. And it was full. The shelves held boxes, dozens of boxes, made of wood, each one approximately the size of a briefcase, each one with a brass latch and a small label on the front. The labels were handwritten in the same careful script Maya had seen on the documents in the outer room. Coins, Roman, 1st to 3rd century. Coins, American colonial. Paintings, Dutch masters, 17th century. Paintings, American impressionist. Documents, Continental Congress. Documents, Civil War correspondence. Jewelry, estate collection. Jewelry, historical provenance. And on and on and on, box after box, shelf after shelf, each one labeled, each one sealed, each one waiting. So on the table in the center of the vault, there was a single leather-bound ledger. Dr. Chen, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who understood the fragility of old things, opened it to the first page. Written in ink that had barely faded, in handwriting that was precise and almost architectural, were the words, Catalog of the Private Collection of Franklin J. Whitmore. Compiled 1934 to 1936. This collection represents 30 years of acquisition and is intended to be preserved in perpetuity for the enrichment of future generations. It is my hope that whoever finds this vault will understand its value not merely in monetary terms, but as a record of human achievement and artistry. Dr. Chen turned the page. The catalog was meticulous. Every item in every box was listed, described, and in many cases, accompanied by a small sketch. The provenance of each piece was noted, where Whitmore had acquired it, from whom, for how much, and why he considered it significant. The ledger was over 200 pages long. Dr. Chen read silently for several minutes, turning pages with gloved hands that Ruth had supplied from her canvas bag. Then she looked up at Maya with an expression that Maya couldn't read. It was somewhere between awe and disbelief, and something that looked almost like fear. "Maya, do you understand what you found? Tell me." "Based on what I'm reading in this catalog, and I want to be very clear that a full appraisal will take months, but based on the descriptions and the provenance records, this collection appears to include original works by Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Monet. It appears to include a set of letters written by Thomas Jefferson. It appears to include a collection of Roman gold coins that may be one of the largest in private hands. It appears to include jewelry that belonged to European royal families." She paused. The room was so quiet that Maya could hear the drip from the ceiling 2 rooms away. "A conservative preliminary estimate, and I cannot stress enough that this is preliminary, would put the value of this collection somewhere in the range of $250 to $315 million. Maya heard the number. She heard every digit of it, and her brain simply refused to process it. $315 million. She was a woman who counted light bulbs, who rationed pasta, who had $11 in her checking account 3 days ago. $315 million was not a number that belonged in her life. It was a number from a different universe, a different story, one about someone else entirely. "Say that again," she whispered. $250 to $315 million. Possibly more, and depending on market conditions and the results of authentication. Maya's knees buckled. She didn't fall. She had never fallen in her life. Not when Derek left. Not when the bills piled up. Not when Lily asked why Daddy didn't call anymore. But her knees buckled, and Ruth was there, a hand on her arm steadying her, and Maya leaned against the vault doorframe, the cold steel pressing into her shoulder, and breathed. $315 million. In a school she bought for $600. Gerald Pratt, who had opened the vault and heard the number just like everyone else, quietly packed up his tools. He shook Maya's hand and said, "Ma'am, it's been a genuine honor." Then he walked up the stairs and drove away, and Maya realized later that he had never sent her a bill. The days that followed were a blur of activity that Maya could barely keep up with. Dr. Chen returned to the university and assembled a team of specialists, art historians, and numismatists, document authenticators, gemologists. They came to the school in small groups, always discreet, always entering through the back, always at times when the road was empty. Patricia Okafor had drawn up non-disclosure agreements that everyone signed before they were even told the address. The authentication process was painstaking. Each box was opened by gloved hands in a sequence determined by Dr. Chen. I needed to calibrate their expectations. Before they encountered the pieces that might genuinely stop their hearts. Each item was examined under lights that Dr. Chen's team had installed in the vault room, professional-grade LED panels that ran off a portable generator because the school's electrical system was decades past functional. Maya had never seen before, compared against known databases and auction records, cross-referenced with the descriptions in Whitmore's ledger. Maya was present for every session. She sat on a folding chair she had brought from home, watching the specialists work, asking questions when she didn't understand something, which was often. She learned the difference between provenance and authentication. She learned that a painting's value depends not just on who painted it, but on where it has been, who has owned it, and whether it has ever been exhibited. She learned that coins are graded on a numbered scale, and that the difference between a grade of 60 and a grade of 65 can mean $100,000. She learned more in those weeks than she had learned in years, and something in her that had been dormant for a long time, a hunger for knowledge, a curiosity that poverty had forced into hibernation, woke up and started paying very close attention. And one by one, the items were confirmed as genuine. The Rembrandt was real, a small oil painting on panel, no bigger than a sheet of paper, depicting a man reading by candlelight. It had been listed in historical records as purchased by an unnamed American collector in 1924 and subsequently lost. Its estimated value alone was $45 million. The Jefferson letters were real, a series of 12 letters written between 1801 and 1803, discussing the Louisiana Purchase in detail that had never been seen by historians. Dr. Chen's colleague from the American History Department literally sat down on the floor when he read them. Their historical value was incalculable. Their market value was estimated at $8 to $12 million. The Roman coins were real, 347 gold and silver coins spanning from the 1st century to the 4th century A.D., in a state of preservation that the numismatist described as extraordinary. The collection was valued at $28 million. The jewelry was real, pieces that could be traced through provenance records to the courts of France, England, and Russia. A sapphire brooch that had belonged to a duchess, a diamond necklace that had been crafted for a coronation. Total estimated value, $53 million. And there was more. Paintings by artists whose names Maya had heard in passing but never studied. Vermeer, Monet, Sargent, Homer. Each one authenticated, each one valued, each one adding millions to a number that had already left the realm of comprehension. The final preliminary appraisal, delivered by Dr. Chen 6 weeks after the vault was opened, came to $312 million. With certain pieces still undergoing authentication and market conditions subject to change, the upper estimate was $315 million. Maya received this number sitting in the teacher's lounge of her school in a plastic chair, drinking coffee from a thermos she had brought from home because there was still no electricity in the building. Dr. Chen handed her the appraisal document, which was 73 pages long and bound in a blue folder. Maya held it in her hands and felt its weight, and understood that she was holding a piece of paper that said she was worth more than $300 million. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't dance or laugh or call anyone. She sat in that plastic chair and drank her coffee and looked out the window at the overgrown field that had once been a playground. And she thought about light bulbs. She thought about the fluorescent light in her kitchen that had flickered and died on a Tuesday night in February. She thought about the $11. She thought about the peanut butter sandwiches and the electric bill and the rent increase and the sound her car made every morning when she turned the key and whispered, "Please start." And then she thought about Lily. Lily, who slept with Professor the stuffed elephant. Lily, who thought her mother was a superhero. Lily, who had no idea that her life had just changed in a way that neither of them could fully understand yet. Maya finished her coffee, put the appraisal document in her bag, and drove to pick up her daughter from school. The legal process moved with the particular slowness of things that involve large amounts of money and multiple interested parties. Patricia Okafor was magnificent. She navigated the property law questions with the precision of a surgeon, establishing definitively that the contents of the building were included in the As's sale and that Maya's ownership was absolute. She researched the Whitmore estate and confirmed that all claims on the collection had been extinguished decades ago. The estate had been settled in the 1950s, and the remaining heirs had signed documents releasing any interest in uncatalogued property associated with Whitmore's various holdings. But there were complications. There were always complications, and the IRS wanted to talk about the tax implications of a discovery of this magnitude. The state of Michigan had questions about cultural heritage and whether certain items in the collection should be considered state property. The Whitmore descendants, There were still a few, scattered across the country, most of them unaware that their great-grandfather's collection had been the subject of a decades-long mystery, were contacted by Patricia as a courtesy, and while none of them had a legal claim, 2 of them hired lawyers anyway, because that is what people do when $300 million enters the conversation. Maya handled all of it. She hired a financial advisor recommended by Patricia. She hired an accountant. She hired a security firm to install cameras and alarms at the school, which was now the most valuable piece of real estate in the county. She did all of this while still working at the warehouse, because the collection hadn't been sold yet, and the money hadn't materialized, and she still had bills to pay and a daughter to feed. She clocked in at the warehouse every morning, lifted pallets for 8 hours, clocked out, changed out of her work clothes in the car, and drove to meetings with lawyers and appraisers and financial advisors who treated her with the careful deference of people who know they are talking to someone who will soon be extraordinarily wealthy. If you are still with us, you know this story is far from over. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss Part 3 of Maya's incredible discovery. Your support means the world to us. Now, back to the story. The news broke on a Thursday. Maya had managed to keep the discovery quiet for almost 2 months, which was longer than anyone had expected. But someone talked. Maybe it was one of the authentication specialists who mentioned it to a colleague. Or maybe it was one of the Whitmore descendants who mentioned it to a friend. Maybe it was someone at the county who put together the $600 auction sale with the sudden appearance of security cameras and professional vehicles at a building that had been empty for 20 years. However it happened, a reporter from the Ann Arbor News called Patricia Okafor on a Thursday afternoon and asked if it was true that a hidden vault containing hundreds of millions of dollars in art and antiquities had been found in a former school in Dexter Township. Patricia called Maya. "It's out," she said. "How do you want to handle this?" Maya was in the warehouse parking lot, sitting in her car, eating a peanut butter sandwich. She looked at the sandwich. She looked at her car. She looked at the warehouse where she had spent 4 years of her life moving boxes for $12 an hour. "I want to tell it myself," she said. "I don't want someone else telling my story." Patricia arranged for a controlled release, a single interview with a reporter she trusted, accompanied by a written statement from Dr. Chen confirming the discovery's significance, and a legal summary from Patricia establishing Maya's ownership. The story ran on a Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, it was national news. Single mother buys abandoned school for $600, finds $315 million, hidden in basement vault. The headline was everywhere. Every news outlet, every social media platform, every morning show, and late-night desk. Maya Castillo, 31 warehouse worker, single mother of 1, had stumbled into one of the largest private collection discoveries in American history. The story had everything the public craved: an underdog, a treasure, a building that time forgot, and a woman who had been brave enough, or desperate enough, or just stubborn enough to see what nobody else had bothered to look for. The response was overwhelming in a way Maya could not have anticipated. Within 24 hours, interview requests came from every major network. A documentary team from New York called Patricia's office 11 times. 3 publishing houses contacted Maya about a book deal before she had even finished reading the news article about herself. A Hollywood producer left a voicemail that began with, "This is better than anything we could write," and ended with a number that had too many zeros for Maya to take seriously. But it was the messages from strangers that got to her, thousands of them, flooding her social media accounts that she barely used, filling up an email address that Janelle helped her set up because her old one was attached to a free service that kept crashing under the volume. And people wrote to tell her she was an inspiration. Single mothers, who said they cried reading the article. People who had been told their whole lives that they were foolish for believing in something, and who saw in Maya's story proof that sometimes the foolish thing is the right thing. A woman in Ohio wrote to say that she had been about to give up on a dream of opening a bakery, and that reading about Maya buying a school for $600 made her call her bank and apply for the loan. A veteran in Texas wrote to say that the story reminded him that treasure isn't always gold. Sometimes it's the courage to open a door everyone else walked past. Maya read every message. She read them at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed, scrolling through her phone with tears running down her face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that her story had touched something in people. She was not just a woman who found a vault, and she was evidence that life could surprise you, that the ground under your feet could contain something extraordinary, that $600 and a stubborn refusal to listen to the word no could change everything. Maya's phone rang so constantly that she turned it off. Janelle called from the warehouse, and Maya could hear the noise in the background, people talking, Dale actually raising his voice, the entire floor buzzing with it. "Girl," Janelle said, and for once in her life, she didn't follow it with advice or a lecture or a judgment. She just said, "Girl." And then she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "I take back every single thing I said. Every single thing. Every word. You hear me? I hear you. I told you it was foolish. I told you nobody wanted it. I told you that nobody else bidding was a bad sign. And you looked at a building that the whole world had thrown away, and you saw something, and you saw something none of us could see. I didn't see the vault, Janelle. I just saw a building that was still standing. That's the same thing, baby. That's exactly the same thing." Dale, her supervisor, the man with the emotional range of a filing cabinet, called her separately. He had never called her before. He didn't seem to know how personal phone calls worked. There was a long pause at the beginning where he seemed to be reading from something, and then he said, "Maya, I just want to say that you were always one of the best workers I had, and I always knew you were going to do something, something good." It was the most words Dale had ever said to her at once, and Maya thanked him and hung up before either of them could become uncomfortable with the moment. Maya's mother called. Maya let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 4 minutes long and contained, in order, shock, disbelief, tears, a retraction of the comment about Maya's father, more tears, a request to see the vault, a reminder that Maya needed to eat something because she probably hadn't eaten, a tangent about a neighbor who had also been on the news once, but for something much less impressive, and a final, quiet sentence that Maya played back 3 times. "I am so proud of you, baby. I am so, so proud of you." Maya called her back. They talked for an hour. It was the best conversation they'd had in years. Her mother didn't give advice. She didn't say, "I told you so." Now, mostly because she had told Maya the opposite. She just listened and asked questions, and at one point said, "Your father would have been so happy, Maya. He was always looking for something like this. He just never found it. But you did. You found it." That sentence stayed with Maya long after the call ended. Her father, the dreamer, the man who chased every possibility and caught none of them. Her father, who had died when she was 19, still chasing, and still believing that the next thing would be the thing. She had spent her adult life running from his example, and now she had done exactly what he would have done. She had bet on a building that nobody wanted. She had trusted her gut when everyone said she was wrong. And she had found something extraordinary. Maybe she wasn't so different from him after all. Maybe the only difference between a dreamer and a fool is whether the door they open has something behind it. The weeks after the story broke were chaos dressed in opportunity. Maya's life split into 2 timelines, the one she was living and the one the world was watching. In the living version, she still woke up at 6, still made Lily breakfast, still drove the car with 187,000 miles on it, because the collection hadn't been liquidated, and she hadn't received a single dollar yet. In the watching version, she was a sensation, a folk hero, a symbol of something that people desperately wanted to believe in, that luck existed, that perseverance paid off, that the universe occasionally reached down and handed a person exactly what they needed at exactly the right moment. The interview requests came in waves, first the local outlets, then the nationals, then the internationals. A crew from Japan flew to Michigan to film a segment about Maya for a program about extraordinary discoveries. So a British documentary team wanted to follow her for 6 months. A podcaster with 12 million subscribers called Patricia's office and offered Maya $50,000 just to sit down for a 2-hour conversation. Maya said no to most of them. She said yes to 3, a local news interview because she felt she owed the community an explanation, a national morning show because Patricia said the visibility would help establish her ownership in the public record, and a long-form magazine piece because the writer, a woman named Diane, who had grown up in a trailer park in West Virginia, said something in her pitch email that stopped Maya cold. She wrote, "I don't want to write about the treasure. I want to write about the woman who was brave enough to buy a building when she couldn't afford light bulbs." Maya did the magazine interview in the school library, sitting in one of the small chairs sized for 8-year-olds, surrounded by thousands of books that nobody had read in 20 years. Diane asked her what the first thing she felt was when she saw the vault contents. "Confusion," Maya said. "Not excitement. Not joy. Confusion. Because my brain had spent 31 years learning how the world works for people like me, and what I was looking at broke every rule I had ever been taught. People like me don't find vaults full of treasure. People like me find the electric bill and the rent increase, and the letter that says your after-school program fees are overdue." So my first feeling was confusion, because reality had stopped following its own rules. And the second feeling? Fear. Because I knew that the moment other people found out, they would try to take it from me. Not because they were bad people, but because that is how the world works. When someone who has nothing suddenly has everything, you're back where you started, except now you're back where you started, except now you know what you lost. Were you ready? No. But I was careful. And I had Patricia. Patricia Okafor had become more than Maya's attorney. She had become her shield, her translator, her guide through a world that operated on rules Maya had never been taught. Patricia handled the Whitmore descendants, 2 of whom had filed exploratory legal motions that their own attorneys privately admitted had no merit, but that needed to be addressed nonetheless. She handled the IRS, negotiating a tax structure that would allow Maya to manage the enormous liability that came with a discovery of this magnitude without being bankrupted by the very wealth she had found. She handled the state of Michigan, which had expressed interest in certain items of historical significance and had to be persuaded, firmly and repeatedly, that Maya's ownership was not contingent on the state's approval. And she handled the people who came out of nowhere. There were so many of them. An uncle Maya hadn't spoken to in 15 years called to say he had always believed in her. A cousin she barely remembered sent a letter asking for a loan to start a business, selling handmade candles. I were alive. Left a voicemail saying that we're alive. Left a voicemail saying that she was sure Derek would want Maya to share the discovery with his side of the family. Maya listened to that voicemail once, deleted it, and never thought about it again. But it was the stranger from Chicago who shook her the most, a man named Leonard Price, who presented himself as a collector and historian, arrived at the school one morning without an appointment and told the security guard that he had information about the Whitmore collection that Maya needed to hear. Patricia was skeptical, but Maya whose instincts had served her well so far, agreed to meet him in the teacher's lounge with Patricia present. Leonard Price was in his 70s, thin, impeccably dressed, and black and white, yellowed at the edges. Black and white, yellowed at the edges, showing two men standing in front of a building Maya recognized immediately. The Lincoln Consolidated School. One of the men was older, white-haired, wearing a suit and holding a hat. The other was younger, also in a suit, and standing slightly behind the first man in the way of someone who worked for him rather than with him. "That," said Leonard, pointing to the older man, "is Franklin Whitmore. And that," he pointed to the younger man, "is my grandfather, James Price. He was Whitmore's personal secretary from 1928 to 1942. Maya looked at the photo. She looked at Leonard. "Your grandfather worked for Whitmore." "He did. And he kept records, detailed records, not of the collection itself. He was never allowed in the vault. But records of Whitmore's instructions, his intentions, his wishes for what should happen to the collection after his death." Leonard opened the folder further and produced a stack of papers, photocopies of handwritten documents, in the same careful script that Maya had seen in the ledger inside the vault. They were letters from Whitmore to James Price, written between 1940 and 1948, the last years of Whitmore's life. Patricia examined them. Dr. Chen, who was called in from the university, examined them. They appeared genuine, and what they said changed everything Maya thought she knew about the vault. Franklin Whitmore had not hidden his collection out of paranoia. He had hidden it out of purpose. The letters made clear that Whitmore had grown disillusioned with the idea of his collection being sold at auction or distributed among heirs who, in his words, would not understand the responsibility of stewardship. He had seen too many great collections scattered after their owners died, the pieces separated, the context lost, the whole rendered into parts that meant nothing on their own. He wanted something different. In a letter dated March 1944, Whitmore wrote to James Price, "It is my intention that the collection remain intact until such time as it is discovered by someone who demonstrates, through the very act of discovery, the qualities I most value: curiosity, persistence, and the willingness to look where others will not. I do not wish the collection to be found by wealth or by credential. I wish it to be found by character." Maya read that letter sitting in the teacher's lounge of the school that Whitmore had built, and she understood, for the first time, that she had not just stumbled onto a fortune. She had been chosen, not by Whitmore personally, not by destiny or fate or any mystical force, but by a set of circumstances that Whitmore had designed, perhaps unknowingly, perhaps with more foresight than anyone gave him credit for, to filter out everyone except the person who was exactly desperate enough, and exactly curious enough, and exactly stubborn enough to buy a building nobody wanted and open a door that nobody had opened. $600. That was the filter. The building had been available for years. Anyone could have bought it. The county had been trying to sell it. But the price was too low for serious investors who assumed anything that cheap must be worthless, and too high for people who had no use for an 18,000 square foot school building. The only person who would buy it was someone who had almost nothing, who saw value where others saw liability, who was willing to bet their last reserves on a possibility. Someone like Maya. Leonard Price did not want money. He did not want a share of the collection. He wanted something much simpler. For he wanted his grandfather's role in the story to be remembered. James Price had kept Whitmore's secret for decades, had never told anyone about the vault, had honored his employer's wishes long past the point where revealing the truth might have made him wealthy. He had died in 1987, still keeping the secret, still believing that the right person would eventually come along. Leonard had only learned the truth when he discovered his grandfather's papers after his own mother died in 2019. Now, he had been searching for the vault ever since, not to claim it, but to complete his grandfather's story. Maya promised him that James Price would be part of the record. She promised him that when the collection was eventually displayed, because she was already forming a plan that felt as inevitable as gravity, James Price's name would be on the wall. Leonard shook her hand. He was crying, quietly, in the way old men cry when something they have carried for a long time is finally set down. He thanked her, collected his folder, and left. That night, Maya sat on the floor of Lily's bedroom and watched her daughter sleep. Lily was 5 years old. She had no idea that her life was different now. She knew that Mama had bought a school because Maya had told her that. She knew that Mama had found some old things in the school because Maya had told her that too, like in the simple language of bedtime stories. But she didn't know about the numbers. She didn't know about the lawyers or the reporters or the people calling with their hands out. She knew that Professor the Stuffed Elephant had been to the school and had reportedly enjoyed it. That was the extent of her understanding, and Maya wanted to protect that innocence for as long as possible. But she also wanted to give Lily something better. Not just money. Money was the simplest part of this, and the part that required the least imagination. She wanted to give Lily a model, a way of being in the world that said, you can be afraid and still move forward. You can be broke and still be brave. You can buy a building that nobody wants and find something inside it that changes everything, not because you were lucky, but because you were willing to look. The plan came together over the following months, shaped by conversations with Patricia and Dr. Chen and Ruth, and, increasingly, with a growing circle of advisors who saw in Maya not just a client, but a vision. The plan was this. Maya would not sell the collection. Not entirely. She would sell certain pieces, enough to secure her family's financial future, to pay the taxes, to fund what came next. But the core of the collection, the pieces that Whitmore had spent his life assembling, the pieces that told a story about human achievement and artistry, those would stay together. Those would stay in the school. Maya was going to turn the Lincoln Consolidated School into a museum. The idea had been forming since the day she first walked through the building and felt the presence of all those lives that had passed through it. The children who had learned to read in those classrooms, the teachers who had written spelling lists on those chalkboards, the community that had gathered in that gymnasium for holiday concerts and basketball games. The school had been built to educate, and Maya intended to restore that purpose. Not as a school for children, but as a museum for everyone. A place where the collection could be seen and studied and appreciated, where the building itself could tell its story, where the hidden room and the vault could be visited by anyone who wanted to stand in the space where a fortune had been hidden for 88 years and feel the weight of it. She announced the plan at a press conference in May, standing on the front steps of the school, under the stone lintel that read, "Knowledge is light." She wore the same sweater she had worn to the auction, washed by hand, because she wanted to remember where she had started. Lily stood next to her, holding Professor, squinting into the cameras with the cheerful confusion of a child who did not understand why so many people were taking her picture. "I bought this building for $600, Maya said, reading from notes she had written on the back of an electric bill, because some habits die hard. Everybody told me it was a mistake. My mother told me. My best friend told me. Even the auctioneer seemed surprised that anyone bid at all. And they were right to be skeptical. I was a single mother with $11 in her checking account, buying a building I couldn't afford to heat, let alone repair. On paper, it made no sense." She paused. The crowd was quiet. The cameras were rolling. "But I've learned something in the last few months. The things that make no sense on paper are sometimes the things that make the most sense in the world. Franklin Whitmore built this school almost 100 years ago, and he hid a collection inside it worth more than $300 million. He didn't hide it in a bank. He didn't hide it in a mansion or a corporate office. He hid it in a school because he believed that knowledge is the most valuable thing a person can have, and he wanted his collection to be found by someone who understood that. I don't know if I'm the person he imagined. I'm a warehouse worker. I pick up boxes for a living. But I know the value of a building that refuses to fall down, and I know the value of a door that someone tells you not to open. She looked down at her notes, then folded them and put them in her pocket. I'm not going to sell this collection. I'm going to share it. This building is going to become a museum. Well, he wrote in his ledger that the collection was hidden in the school where it was hidden, free to anyone who wants to see it. Because that's what Franklin Whitmore wanted. He wrote in his ledger that the collection was intended to be preserved for the enrichment of future generations. Those are his words, not mine. And I intend to honor them. The crowd applauded. Lily looked up at Maya and said, loud enough for the microphones to catch, "Mama, can Professor come to the museum too?" The audience laughed, and Maya picked up her daughter and held her against her chest and said, "Professor can have his own exhibit." That moment, Maya holding Lily on the steps of the school, Lily clutching a stuffed elephant, both of them blinking into the flashbulbs, became the image that defined the story. It was on the cover of the magazine piece Diane wrote, which ran under the headline, "The Woman Who Bought a Dream for $600. It was shared millions of times on social media. It was printed on posters that people hung in their offices and classrooms and kitchens, because it represented something that felt increasingly rare, proof that ordinary people could still find extraordinary things. The renovation of the school took 14 months and cost $11.2 million, funded by the selective sale of pieces that Dr. Chen and Maya agreed were the least historically significant and could be released without diminishing the collection's integrity. The pieces were sold through a private auction handled by a firm in New York that specialized in estate collections, and the auction itself became a minor event in the art world, with bidders from 17 countries competing for items that had been hidden underground since 1936. The most talked about sale was a set of French Impressionist sketches that went for $2.4 million to a museum in Tokyo, which issued a public statement thanking Maya for her stewardship of the collection and expressing gratitude that the pieces would continue to be displayed for public benefit. The renovation work was done by a team of architects and contractors who specialized in historical preservation, guided by Ruth Bergman, who had appointed herself the project's unofficial historian, and showed up every day with her canvas bag full of reference books and her flashlight the size of her forearm, even though the building now had fully functioning electricity. Ruth treated the renovation as a personal mission. She insisted that every detail be authentic. The paint colors matched to original samples scraped from the walls. The tile floor repaired with tiles from the same quarry that had supplied the originals in 1928. And the windows unboarded and restored with glass that matched the original wavy texture. She argued with the architects about doorknobs. She made a contractor redo an entire section of plastering because the finish didn't match the 1920s technique. She was, in her own words, insufferable, and everyone loved her for it. The classrooms were restored to their original condition, with the chalkboards preserved behind glass, including the one with the spelling list that read, "Courage, Discovery, the books plus thousands more donated by the books, plus thousands more donated by the community and by book lovers from around the world who had read Maya's story and wanted to contribute." The piano was tuned and placed in the restored auditorium, where it was played at the museum's opening ceremony by a concert pianist who had grown up in Dexter and who said that performing in the school where her grandmother had learned to read was the honor of her lifetime. The basement was transformed into a gallery space. The hidden room was preserved exactly as Maya had found it, with the deadbolt door and the cinder block corridor and the original brass light fixtures, so that visitors could walk the same path Maya had walked and feel. For open, the boxes arranged on their shelves. The vault was displayed open, the boxes arranged on their shelves. The ledger in a glass case in the center of the room open to the page where Whitmore had written his intention. The Whitmore Collection Museum opened on a Saturday in September, on one of those perfect Michigan autumn days when the sky is so blue it looks painted, and the air carries just enough chill to remind you that something is changing. Maya stood at the front door and greeted every visitor personally. She had considered letting someone else handle it. Patricia had suggested hiring a public relations team, and Ruth had offered to be the face of the opening, so that Maya could enjoy it from a distance. But Maya wanted to be at the door. She wanted to shake every hand, and she wanted to look people in the eye and say, "Welcome to my school," because saying those words out loud still felt like a miracle, and she wasn't ready to let that feeling become routine. She shook hands and answered questions and posed for photos and told the story so many times that it began to feel like it had happened to someone else. Some braver, so luckier version of herself who had walked into this building a year and a half ago with a flashlight and a stuffed elephant and no idea what was waiting in the dark. But every time she thought the story was becoming just a story, something would pull her back. A child's face pressed against the glass of the vault display, eyes wide and mouth open. A grandmother who took Maya's hands and said in a whisper, "My mother went to school here. She learned to read in that classroom upstairs, so thank you for bringing it back." A man in a wheelchair who had driven 4 hours from Ohio because he had read about the museum and wanted to see the Rembrandt before he died, and who sat in front of the painting for 45 minutes without moving, and who said, when Maya asked if he was okay, "I've been looking at reproductions my whole life. I never thought I'd see the real thing. It's smaller than I expected, and more beautiful than I can say." 7,000 people came on opening day. The line stretched down the gravel drive and onto the county road. Families came with picnic baskets and lawn chairs, turning the wait into a tailgate. School groups came in yellow buses, the children spilling out with the chaotic energy of field trips everywhere. Historians and art lovers and collectors came from across the country, some of them arriving in cars that cost more than Maya's old apartment had been worth. A group of students from the University of Michigan came with notebooks, from sketching the pieces in pencil, their professor standing behind them, pointing out details that Maya herself had only recently learned to see. But the visitors Maya watched most carefully were the ones who reminded her of herself, the young mothers with children on their hips, the workers in their off hours still wearing the residue of their shifts, and the people who drove old cars and wore clean clothes that weren't new and who stood in front of the Rembrandt with expressions that said, "I didn't know I was allowed to be here." One woman, young, maybe 25, with a baby in a carrier strapped to her chest, stood in the vault room and cried without sound, tears just streaming down her face. And when Maya walked over and asked if she was all right, the woman said, "I work 2 jobs. I haven't slept a full night in 8 months. And I almost didn't come today because I thought a place like this wasn't for people like me. But it is. You made it for people like me." Maya hugged her. She held a stranger in the basement of a school and let her cry, and the baby between them slept through the whole thing with the serene indifference of someone who has no concept of money or art or the distance between having nothing and having everything. Those were the people the museum was for. Those were the people Whitmore had written about, even if he hadn't known it. Future generations. Not the wealthy, not the credentialed, not the people who already had access to everything. The people who had nothing except curiosity and the willingness to walk through a door. Maya made other decisions in the months that followed, decisions that reflected the person she was becoming. Not a different person, but a fuller version of the person she had always been. When she set up a trust fund for Lily that would pay for her education through graduate school and then release the remaining balance when she turned 30, old enough to handle wealth without being consumed by it. She bought a house, not a mansion, not an estate, but a 3-bedroom house with a garden, 10 minutes from the school, with a kitchen where every light worked and a refrigerator that didn't make sounds. She paid off Janelle's mortgage. Janelle cried and said she couldn't accept it. I and Maya said, "You watched my daughter 100 times for free. You told me I was making a mistake, and then loved me anyway when I made it. This isn't charity. This is math. I owe you more than a house." She established a scholarship fund for single parents in Washtenaw County, covering tuition and child care and living expenses, because she knew from experience that the biggest barrier to education wasn't intelligence or motivation, but the simple, crushing mathematics of poverty, the inability to study when you're working 2 shifts, to attend class when you can't afford a babysitter, to think about the future when the present is demanding every cent you have. She hired Janelle to manage the museum gift shop. Janelle, who had told her the school was a terrible idea, who had shaken her head and called her foolish, who had loved her through every moment of doubt and disbelief, now stood behind a counter selling postcards of the Rembrandt and refrigerator magnets that read, "Knowledge is light," and stuffed elephants named Professor that had become the museum's unofficial mascot. Lily had been delighted by this development and believed, with the unshakable conviction of a 5-year-old, that every stuffed elephant in the gift shop was a personal friend of the original professor. She tried to find Derek, not for reconciliation, not for money, not for anything she needed from him. She tried to find him because Lily deserved to know her father, and because Maya had learned something about doors. You open them, even the ones you're afraid of, even the ones that might lead to nothing. You open them because the act of opening is itself the point. The private investigator she hired traced Derek to a town in Nevada, where he was working at an auto parts store and living in an apartment that was smaller than Maya's old one. And he had been there for 6 months. Before that, he had been in Arizona, and before that, Colorado. He had been moving, the way Maya's father used to move, chasing something that kept shifting just out of reach. She sent him a letter, a real letter, handwritten on paper, because some things are too important for a screen. She told him about Lily. She told him that Lily was reading now, sounding out words with fierce concentration. She told him that Lily had a stuffed elephant named Professor who went everywhere with her. She told him about the school and the vault and the museum. She did not tell him about the money, because the money was not the point, and she did not want the money to be the reason he responded. She told him that Lily asked about him sometimes, usually at bedtime, in the quiet voice children use when they are asking about things that hurt, and that the door was open if he wanted to walk through it. When she wrote the letter 3 times before she was satisfied, and she mailed it without rereading it a 4th time, because she knew that if she kept editing, she would never send it. She didn't hear back for 3 months. She told herself that was okay. She told herself that the letter was the point, not the response. And then one evening, checking the mailbox out of habit more than hope, she found a letter, handwritten on lined paper torn from a spiral notebook, postmarked from Reno. It said 2 sentences. "I'm sorry. I'd like to try." She didn't know if he would follow through. She didn't know if sorry was a beginning or just a word. She didn't know if the door she had opened would lead to anything resembling the father Lily deserved. But she had opened it, and that was enough. For now, that was enough. On the 1-year anniversary of the museum's opening, Maya hosted a dinner in the school library. The guests included Ruth Bergman, some who had been named the museum's director of historical research and who had finally published her paper on Whitmore, which was now considered the definitive work on his life. Dr. Helen Chen, who had used the collection as the basis for a new course at the university, and who had supervised the authentication of every item with a thoroughness that had become legendary in the field. Patricia Okafor, who had handled the legal complexities with such skill that other attorneys now cited the Castillo case in property law seminars. Gerald Pratt, the locksmith, who had finally sent a bill for $1 with a note that said, "For services rendered. The rest is on the house." Leonard Price, who stood in front of the plaque bearing his grandfather's name and wept openly and without apology. And Janelle, who sat next to Maya and ate everything on her plate, and then started on Maya's and said, "This museum has the best catering. I should know. I ordered it." Lily was there too, sitting on the floor of the reading area in one of the small chairs sized for 8-year-olds, reading a book to Professor. She was 6 now, and she could read on her own, sounding out the words with the fierce concentration of a child who has been told that knowledge is light and has taken it personally, so would return. The book had been repaired would return. The book had been repaired and placed back on the shelf, and Lily had found it on her own, without being told its significance, and had declared it her favorite. Maya watched her daughter read, and she thought about the line on that page, the one that had been waiting in an empty library for decades. And she knew that the best things in life are always hidden in the places nobody thinks to look. She thought about what that meant. She thought about a school nobody wanted, and a door nobody opened, and a vault that held a fortune beneath a building that the world had forgotten. She thought about light bulbs and peanut butter sandwiches, and a car that started every morning only because she asked it to. She thought about her father, the dreamer who never found his treasure. Whitmore, who hid his life's work under a Whitmore, who hid his life's work under a school because he trusted the future more than he trusted the present. She thought about James Price, who kept a secret for 50 years because a promise was a promise. And she thought about herself. Maya Castillo, 32 years old now, museum founder, mother, former warehouse worker, a former woman with $11, current woman who had learned that the distance between nothing and everything is sometimes just a locked door and the stubborn refusal to walk away from it. She stood up from her chair and walked to the window. Outside, the gravel drive that had been empty and overgrown when she first saw the school was now a proper road, lined with young trees that the local garden club had planted. The field that had been a playground was a garden now, designed by a landscape architect who had donated her time, with paths and benches and a section where school children could plant things and watch them grow. Beyond the garden, the sun was setting behind the tree line, turning the sky the color of something expensive that Maya would have described a year ago as orange, but now knew was called vermilion, because Dr. Chen had taught her the word while showing her a painting that used it. And Maya had liked the word so much that she said it to herself sometimes when nobody was listening. Vermilion, the color of a sky that doesn't know it's beautiful. She went back to the table and sat down next to Lily. Lily looked up from her book. "Mama, this book is about a girl who finds a secret cave. Is it a good book?" "It's the best book. The girl is brave. She goes in the cave even though it's dark." "That does sound brave." "Mama, were you brave when you found the vault?" Maya thought about it. She thought about standing at the top of those basement stairs with a flashlight that wasn't strong enough and a heart that was beating too fast. She thought about the deadbolt that didn't match and the hour and 20 minutes with a $22 lockpick set. She thought about the moment the door opened and she whispered into the darkness, "Is anyone else here?" "I was terrified," she said. "But you went in anyway." "I went in anyway." "That's what brave means, Mama. Brave means you're scared, but you go in the cave." Maya kissed the top of her daughter's head and held her close. Outside the window, the vermilion sky was fading to purple, and the first stars were appearing over the building that knowledge had built and that light had finally reached. She had gone in the cave. She had opened the door, and everything on the other side had been waiting for her. Not because she was special, not because she was chosen, not because the universe owed her anything, but because she was the one who showed up. She was the one who paid $600 for a building that the world called worthless and saw in it something worth more than everything she had. She was the one who looked where nobody else looked, who opened what nobody else opened, who believed, against all evidence and all advice, that the best things in life are hidden in the places nobody thinks to look. And she was right. Thank you so much for watching this video and sticking with Maya's story until the very end. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another one of our stories. Every like, every comment, every share helps us keep bringing these incredible true stories to life. And if Maya's journey taught us anything, it's that sometimes the most extraordinary things are waiting right beneath the surface. You just have to be brave enough to look. We'll see you in the next one.